Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Some Dungeon Guy. Thanks for joining us. Today is going to be part 3 of our Inkarnate tutorial series. Today's tool is all about stamps. That's right, we're going to show you some tips and tricks on how to use the stamp tool effectively in Inkarnate. As always, we ask hit the like button if you enjoy what you're watching, and leave a comment below for future video ideas. Let's get to it. Alrighty folks, welcome back. So today is part 3 of our Inkarnate tutorial. Now if you saw us for part 1 and part 2, those are on how to create your land and then how to add some brush effects in order to shade a little bit. Today is all about stamps. Now stamps are the actual physical representations of items inside of your maps. Now that could be mountains, trees, buildings, homes, wells, whatever. Okay, it's the actual items that make up the items inside of your maps. So we're going to do some basic tutorial stuff, run you through the basics. Now scattered throughout the video are going to be some pretty hot tips that I use myself to make my map building a whole lot easier. So we have here the map that we started with on the first 2 videos. We're going to go ahead and start editing that map. Alright, once we have that map all loaded up, again, we're going to go over to the left and choose our stamp tool. Okay. Now we have some basic controls at the top, which is layer, rotate, opacity, and size, which are the same from your brush tool, if you remember, along with some of the familiar items over on the left, but we're going to run back through them just real briefly. We've got the actual catalog choices that have been made, so if you open up your catalog, it's going to bring you to what items are inside of that asset pack. Highlighted on the left. Now we chose Fantasy World when we created the map, so that is the default pack for whatever textures and stamp packages you want. Now you can choose another pack, just click it, and it's going to give you an entirely different set of things. Now, here's a pro tip. I like to mix and match mine depending on what I'm feeling on that given day. You may find that some things just sort of match, or some things are they don't offer enough options in, let's say, Fantasy World, and so Fantasy Regional may have a better option for you, okay? So don't hesitate to mix and match. If you want to click on all of them, if you click Inkarnate, that is actually going to bring up everything under that, all right? So it's going to give you things you most likely wouldn't need, like a specific treasure chest or a torch for a world map. But it's going to give you every option made available, okay? So for today, we're going to go back to Fantasy World. So we're just going to choose the main asset pack. You can go underneath and choose, let's say, Elven Buildings, and it's just going to pull up Elven Buildings or decorations and things like that. And that's perfectly fine. It'll help narrow down your choices. Now, choosing the actual Fantasy World, again, will give you everything inside. Now, I like to scroll through and pick what I want to pick. Sometimes I'm looking for inspiration, but you can do it either way. And so our first step, we're going to start with core items, okay? So the core items here are going to be the things that most people use. I'm going to choose Brown Mountains, okay? Now, most of my island is green, okay? But we're going to pretend like these mountains are jutting up out of nowhere, okay? So as you're familiar, once you've gotten that specific stamp chosen, it's going to give you, some of them give you different patterns, okay? This one, for example, has 9 different stamps inside of it. You can scroll through those, and either in the small selection screen or out here in the center of the map, you can see the different options. Now, inside of stamps, it gives you random stamps, okay? If I unselect that, every time I make a stamp, it's going to give me the exact same variation. Now, if I hit random, every time I make a stamp, notice that it's going to use a completely different stamp out of this 9 that are selected up above, okay? Now that's super handy if you want your map to look more organic and a little less sort of pre-made. Underneath, you're going to find recently used. Now these are going to be the various stamps that you have, well, just that simple, recently used. So you can tell here I've used several different kinds of mountains and cities. So if you are switching back and forth between, let's say, hills, mountains, and trees, you can just sort of click and go to one and then click and go to the other, okay? You can set up favorites inside of the catalog, and that'll actually save those favorites right here. You can favorite your specific changes with your advanced settings and things as well, but that's a little bit further down. Okay, inside of your stamp tool, you've got size. That's going to change the actual size of the stamp. The opacity is going to make it more or less see-through. Rotation is going to just turn it on around, right? Make it look dizzy. Layer. Now, layer is an important aspect. It's not something you necessarily need right off, but for example, if you were to lay this down on layer 1, okay, the next mountain would automatically lay on top of it because it's also level 1. However, if I chose something on layer 0, it falls behind whatever's on layer 1, okay? So we'll get a little bit more into that down the road. Basically, that is the height at which this item sits on the map, okay? Flip, it's gonna flip it left to right. It's gonna flip it up and down. Blend mode, it basically gives you some different color options for when you are setting a stamp down. It's gonna, you kind of play with these. This is really a little bit more advanced stuff. I don't even mess with those very often myself, but they're definitely a good option for some things. Blur is going to blur the actual texture itself of the map, of the stamp. Shadow is going to give it a shadow or not give it a shadow. You can see here it's got a little bit of a drop shadow. We can choose object or layer. Object is going to be, it's going to cast it onto other layers and or other objects on that layer, and layer is going to cast it behind all the items on that layer, okay? So if inside of that, if we change that to object, we can actually click in here. Again, a little bit more advanced. You can change what kind of blur or what kind of shadow you have inside of your shadows and things. But for now, we're gonna go with the normal. Now, the advanced settings, which we are gonna cover, are going to be a couple of things. Placement, so it's going to let you do a couple of things with that. It defaults to auto on a lot of these stamps. Some stamps will be set on single, some will be set on multiple. Now, single will let you click a stamp and it automatically assumes you're only going to place one, so it automatically puts the selection tool around it, allowing you to move it, resize it, and rotate it to your will, okay? So that's the single option. Now, multiple is going to assume that you're gonna hold and drag the mouse button, and it will, as long as you hold it down, it will continue to make stamps, okay? So this allows you to like fill in different areas and things like that. Now it's set to auto for a handful of reasons, okay? Same thing with auto select. If you click one mountain down, it automatically selects it into the menu. Unblur, automatically selects it into the selection tool, which allows you to go ahead and edit it. Especially useful for towns and specific individual points of interest. You may want to go ahead and edit right off the bat. Auto select will not do that, so you'll click it and it just automatically becomes part of the background, okay? All right, I'm gonna set it to auto, and a lot of the different stamp packages will sort of do what they are pre-programmed to do, but you can come back in and change it. Now, area gets a little tricky. Much like our brush tool, we can actually change the size of the brush that we are brushing on stamps with. And you don't think of stamps as brushes, but at least in this aspect there are. You'll see that that circle with that area changes the area, and so it makes a larger area for stamps to create. And one click of the mouse button will create whole series of mountains in this case. The density is going to choose how many mountains or whatever the stamp is inside of that circle. So if I set that really low, it's going to make it really low. It's going to set it really high, and it's going to pack them in there, okay? So you can see how that would be able to pack in some mountains fairly quickly. Now, especially if you're making huge mountain ranges and things, not a bad plan. Now I'm going to start off with this set to 0, so it's going to be back to the individual stamps. Randomize angle is just that. It's going to randomize what angle the stamp comes down at. Like right now it's set at 0, so it's perfectly upright. If I set that to a 45-degree angle, boom, it starts changing the directions. Certainly useful for some stamps, not as useful for others, because obviously you want mountains to have a certain look. Random flip will do the same thing, except it will change the flip horizontally and things, so it just sort of randomizes the pattern. Now again, especially with certain items, rocks especially, are really good for that. Clouds, things like that, where they may have a more organic shape to them, it's good to have those selected. So now that we have the basic rules, let's go in and show you how to alter an item or edit an item stamp once it is selected. So if we place down a mountain, okay, now we have a couple different options. We can choose the select tool up in the top left, or again, one of my expert tips here, one hotkey you should learn is V for victory, okay? Hitting V takes you to the select tool, which will allow you to select items, all right? Once you select it, the little 4 arrow crosshairs will allow you to move it to where you would like it to be. So if you inadvertently place it over water, you can just kind of slide it on down. The grab bars will allow you to freeform stretch it, okay? You can do the corners and they will keep it in the same proportions. The yellow circle will allow you to rotate said item, allowing you to sort of make it fit whatever it is you are needing it to do. Now, this little menu bar, the hamburger menu bar, clicking it will let you choose all stamps like this, for example, stamps from this set. So if you know I just placed a whole bunch of mountains like this one, I could hit this and it'll select multiples at a time. Duplicate, and I find this is definitely one of those things that's a little bit handy. So let's say we placed a couple of stamps, okay? Let's say you know what, I'm going to change those down a little, sorry. We're going to use another hotkey, which is S and W, to shrink and enlarge for my stamps. So let's say we're going to place a few stamps down, okay? Back to that, we're going to use V to the select tool, and let's say we're going to copy or select all of those, right click, which will bring the same thing as a hamburger menu, okay? So we're going to duplicate, okay? And as long as you don't click anything else, it has those still selected, you can move those. So maybe you really like a certain mountain range, maybe you don't, okay? Maybe you make a wall or something, which we'll get into. It'll help you, move around your pieces and make more. It automates a few things, so you can sort of make these if you wanted to. You could highlight all of those, duplicate, and so forth, okay? One other function with that duplicate option is inside of that hamburger menu is the group, okay? A couple of things. Let's say we did not choose group, okay? If we have all of these selected, I'm gonna move them over here so we can see them. We have all these selected. S and W will shrink the individual pieces, right? You can see the mountains kind of growing. Or if you were to change the actual size on, right? It's going to plump up each individual mountain, all right? If you group it, all right? If you group it, then when you up and down the size, it keeps it proportional to how you originally had it, okay? So, again, in perspective, if we take this mountain and make it larger, look at that, okay? If we select the original group, we're going to duplicate it and move a copy over, and we're just gonna enlarge it. Notice the difference in which case they scale, okay? This makes larger mountains, and this makes a larger version of the mountain range, okay? Now, this will become very important when we start talking about walls, and anytime we're mass creating something, it's gonna make a pretty big difference, all right? So we're kind of go back to scratch a little bit, and in our stamp tool, let's say, we're gonna slap some mountains down. Now, one hot tip, you see I'm dragging and dropping mountains. Now, for example, if I start here, drag my mouse button and hold down the S key, it's going to shrink as I go farther away, okay? So you can do the same thing going up, and it's going to make the mountains sort of get bigger. So it helps you add a little bit of depth and scale to your mountains, all while dragging it, so you're not making a selection and then changing it and then making a selection and changing it. You can sort of do it on the fly, okay? So that's a hot tip. Just holding down the S and W keys while you're dragging your mouse will let you sort of get a different size scale, okay? We're just gonna fill in some mountains here. Again, not a specific plan in place, so we're kind of winging it as we go, right? Is it okay to do that? Absolutely. If you don't have something pre-visioned, sometimes just coming in here and clicking and getting yourself some ideas that way. Okay, again, using the S and W keys to make them smaller and larger, and we'll slap a couple like so. Okay, now that's a good example with mountains. Okay, let's say we are working with some trees. Okay, so we can come in here, we can actually search for, let's say, tree, and let's find a tree that we like. So let's say today that we're going to use some pines. All right, now with these pine trees, depending on the size you want, again, you can S and W for scale. This is where I find something like the area is going to make a big difference, okay? So let's choose an area. Let's say it's this big. And then you got to watch this density, right? Because if you're planting down trees, that is a dense packet of trees, all right? So let's maybe bring that down into the realistic world. If you want them super thick, good. Boom. Drop that density to 70. And the first couple swipes, I'm just kind of packing them into holes and making the most dense parts of wherever it is I'm going to forest, okay? Now, you can do this, and then you can slowly decrease, and you can use the Alt-A and Alt-Q buttons to change that density. I'm really nervous about my Alt button. It's a little odd. It tends to kick me out of my Firefox browser. I don't know why. Might be human error. Who knows? But I sort of stay away from it. So let's pack in a few trees, like so. Now, this is where this density change can help. If we drag that down a bunch, okay, and now, as we start making borders around the trees we've already started, okay, you'll notice how it makes it look like the trees are sort of tapering off, like they get less dense as you get away from the main forest, right? Sort of helps you do that. The other side of that is if you switch that area back down, you can individually place trees, or you can drag trees, okay? Now I like to stick some trees in the mountains, and this is where I find the individual is pretty good for that. But there you go. So we're gonna raise this up a little bit, and we're just gonna slap some trees through here. All right, so now that we've gotten some trees, all right, this is where, again, trees and rocks and things like that are one of the really good places where this area and density come into play. Now, switching that back down to 0, let's do something different. Okay, we're gonna do some settlements. Let's choose core. We're gonna choose some human civilizations, perhaps. Maybe like this fortified city. Now you may lay down some cities, and maybe you realize afterwards that you actually want them all to be the same distance apart, but not necessarily in the same place. You can just hit V, which gives you that select tool. You can click, hold Control, click another one, and you see where it turns red, where these are green, which means it's not selected. Boom, and click. Okay, and then you can move all of those at once, okay? So if you maybe decided that these cities are all kind of big, if you select them all, you can S and W and shrink them all at the same time, and then, kind of jostle them into place if you want to do them all at the same time. All right, we're just gonna put in a couple more cities and towns just to sort of fill up our space here to give us some more points of interest. All right, now that we have some cities and some towns, again, that V hotkey will allow you to go into select mode, and you can change the opacity, you can change all of those things. You can change, and one thing you might like is if you have different factions, for example, if you select one of these, go to your advanced settings and maybe up the saturation on some of these, right? Suddenly this town looks a little more red. You can maybe change the hue a little bit, and now you have a civilization or a town, right? Remember these settings. You have a town that is green, right? Green and purple. So maybe those are one faction of humans or whatever species you're talking about. You can change these down, and suddenly you have two different factions of the same thing. It gives it easier access. So you can use the same icons. So for example, if you wanted this to be your city icon, these to be your town icons, and so forth, it allows you to differentiate between them on your maps. So that is an excellent option. But one of the other ways we can go in and manipulate an item, I talked a second ago about walls and things like that. So watch this little trick. Okay, so let's say we needed to make a bridge. All right, now this bridge, who knows where it's going to go, but let's say it's going to go across this whole span. Well, we don't necessarily want the bridge to look, giant. Okay, because that's going to be out of proportion to the towns. So let's say we wanted to make it a little bit smaller. Okay, well, then what is a good way to bridge that gap? Well, okay, there's a bunch of different options. You could, for example, lay a bridge, connect them together. Okay, and you could sort of do it that way, individually, right? Which is a perfectly fine option. Now, what if you later decided that you wanted this bridge to go this way? Well, you could select them, and then you could rotate it. Oh, look at that. So once you've grouped them together like that, it's going to let you rotate them and move them all as one unit, okay? It will not let you flip them, no, okay? So once you go into the hamburger menu and group them, all right, that allows them to kind of stick together so that you can rotate and flip and do whatever you want inside of there, okay? Same thing sort of being said, you can, when you shrink and enlarge them, they shrink and enlarge together. So this kind of gives you some options, like with a bridge. Okay, it makes a longer bridge without having to make a lot longer bridge. Right click or hit the hamburger menu. You can ungroup them again. Maybe you decide that you don't want it to be there. You want it to be over here instead. So just like that. Okay, and you can tell inside of that stamp, while we rotated it to fit our needs, there are other versions of the stamp which allow you to do other things. And again, don't forget you always have the flip horizontally and vertically options as well to make it fit whatever terrain you're looking for. Now, one of the other things in regards to stamps on your map is that once you get a lot of stamps on here, sometimes you're going to find that it's relatively difficult to select a specific mountain, okay, or a specific tree. Now, one thing you can do is on the right-hand side of your screen, it's going to give you layers, which is let you go through and choose your layers, scene settings, which again allows you to do shadows and things. But the most important one I use is objects. Okay, so if I choose brown mountains, for example, it's going to choose a brown mountain. But I can go here and type in brown mountain, all right? And it's going to allow me to, let's say, click and then shift click, and it'll let me choose all the mountains at once if I want to, right? So let's say I choose the top mountain, shift to the bottom mountain, and click. And then all of a sudden, I can move every mountain in my map all at the same time. Okay, now why would I want to do that? There could be a bunch of reasons, especially things like towns. You may want to, it may be hard to select a specific mountain. So if you need to go through, click here, it'll give you kind of an idea of where you're at, but you can click through and choose the certain mountain if you need to. It allows you to, lock certain things so you can't accidentally delete them and so they stay in place. Now, as a small bonus, I'm going to tack on how to use the path tool. Now, because the path tool is fairly easy, it is just as simple as you might hope it would be. You can free draw or do segments. Free draw is just that. It's going to let you kind of draw a squiggly line. Segments is going to let you do little segments in angles. Okay, so it's going to give you a much more structured set. Now, I personally like the free draw. It just gives it more of a natural appeal. Style, we've got some straight lines, right? We've got some dotted lines, okay? And then we've got some hash marks, okay? Sort of just really just a style preference. Doesn't affect a whole lot. Now, I prefer the small dots, but again, up to you. You can choose the width. So, boom, you can make a huge line. While it's selected, you can actually reorganize the size and make those dots tiny if you want them to, or huge if you want them to. We're going to keep them kind of low or kind of big. You can make them transparent or less transparent. Okay. You can rotate, which, yeah, just like so. So once you make a section, you can actually treat it just like any other stamp and rotate it. So let's say you wanted these two places to hook together. Right, you can rotate it, you can shrink it, enlarge it, and so forth. Okay, you can choose what layer it's on. Now, typically your paths want to be on a higher layer so that they always show up. For example, notice that they overlap over the cities, and if I were to choose that to a lower level, they suddenly start going behind terrain and things. Okay, it's a great example of how levels work in Inkarnate. Layer levels. Same thing. If I choose those lower levels, you see it starts to tuck in behind scenery and things, which, maybe you like that effect, maybe you don't. Again, it's all yours. Color, obviously just color blender. If you have a color you have in mind, you can make a hex color. If you find one on the internet or, you have a pattern that you've been working with, you can jot it down and use that same color. I'm going to use black for today. It's just pretty standard. Shadow, you can actually do a drop shadow on the actual line itself, and you can see in my selection menu it'll change just a little bit. Let's make this shadow super dark, for example, and you can sort of see that blurred effect. Now, I don't need mine that dark. It's a line. I'll sort of get it. Blur, same thing. It's gonna like it would with the regular stamps, it's going to cause it to blur. Just that simple. Allows you to sort of fade it in, fade it out if you want to. All your options. Advanced options, gap length is just that. It's going to choose the length of the gap in between your dots or your lines. Same thing. Here it's going to choose what shape your dots are in, whether that is square or circular. So let's start and make a path between a few places. I've got my color chosen, I've got my width kind of selected, and I've got the dots like I like. And you really just go ahead and start drawing your lines. Alrighty folks, well that almost does it for us for today. Obviously we're going to draw in the rest of our paths and kind of complete our world map. Of course from here, the skies are the limit. Hopefully you've learned some tips and tricks for your Inkarnate stamp tool usage. As always, we ask you to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you're watching. Leave us some comments below for future video ideas and just to give us an idea of what you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.